Hello, everyone. Welcome to JDC Israel's Fall Forum. We're so happy you joined us, and we thank you for being here. I'd like to give a special warm welcome to Mark Szyszewski, President of the JDC Board, and to Ariel Zwang, CEO of JDC. Thank you both for being here. I'd also like to give a special welcome to any invitees or guests that we have joining the call today. Always happy to have you. My name is Annie Sandler, and I'm the chair of JDC's Board Committee for Israel. Recently, we received a number of questions from board members about how we know what our impact is. This has always been an important question for us at JDC Israel, but never more so than now. As most of you know, JDC has been developing innovative programs and services. Wait just one second, my split screen went away. And services for years in order to help Israel's social service system meet the needs of the country's most vulnerable people. The idea was to pilot better ways of caring for the vulnerable, to test them to make sure they are effective, and then hand over the programs we develop to the government or other partners who would go on to assume responsibility and take our programs to scale. Over the decades, we developed hundreds of programs, and about 70% of them hit this mark of success. About 70% government integrated into Israel's national social service system and continue to serve Israel's vulnerable. Examples include, this slide's going to stay up the whole time. Examples include the 50,000 plus older adults that are members of supportive communities, the 10,000 Haredi turning to Maftesh employment centers to find work, and many more. Today, a modest estimate counts about 1 million people benefiting from services that JDC developed each year. There is no question that JDC has impacted Israel's social service system. But in recent years, we have begun asking ourselves whether we can do more. Yes, 1 million people benefit from JDC developed services every single year, but to what extent has our work succeeded in creating lasting change in Israeli society? Have supportive communities helped the 50,000 older adults live longer and better in their homes? Have the Maftesh employment centers contributed to the rise in Haredi employment? The question is at the heart of our current strategy. Today, JDC Israel seeks not only to create innovative programs to fill gaps in social services, we want to move the needle on some of Israel's most complex social economic challenges. And when we say move the needle, what we mean is that we want to create measurable change on a national scale in the lives of the most vulnerable. What makes us think we can do that? And how will we go about achieving that? That's what today's session is all about. Today's meeting special is that we're about to answer many, many questions that have been asked over the past year. We'll see how JDC Israel sets goals, works to achieve them, and measures impact. Taking us through the session is Dr. Sigal Shella, CEO of JDC Israel. And now I'd like to turn it over to you, Sigal. Thank you.
Thanks, Annie. Hello, everyone. So the question is, what actually makes us believe that we can do this, right? So JDC's work in Israel is truly ambitious. As Annie said, we want to move the needle on 5 of the country's most complex social challenges. These are challenges that perpetuate socioeconomic gaps between the different population groups. And left unresolved, these challenges will only intensify, like ticking time bombs. They may explode into problems that exceed Israel's capacity to cope. All of these challenges have been aggravated by COVID. We saw that. And today, each is more extreme and more urgent. We want to tackle these challenges with everything we've got, together with our partners from across the sectors, to achieve real, measurable change. In short, we want to move the needle on our priority challenges. But what actually makes us believe that we can do that? We're talking about tackling some of Israel's most complex and entrenched social challenges. Why do we think it's even doable? The biggest and most compelling reason we think we can do it is because together with our partners across sectors, we have done it before. Let's take a look.
במשך שנים במהלך ההיסטוריה, ג'וינט ישראל היה מגויס בלעזור לקהילה החרדית. בתחילת שנות ה-2000 הגענו למצב שבו 47% בלבד מהנשים ו33% מהגברים היו משולבים בשוק התעסוקה, שזה אחוז נמוך בהרבה משאר האוכלוסיות בישראל. המצב הזה לא יכול להימשך כי הקהילה החרדית הולכת וגדלה במהירות, זו קהילה שכבר היום מהווה 13% מאוכלוסיית ישראל, קהילה של 1.3 מיליון איש. מדינה מפותחת לא יכולה להרשות לעצמה שאוכלוסייה כל כך משמעותית לא תהיה משולבת בשוק העבודה.
ממדי העוני בחברה החרדית גדלו משנה לשנה. והתופעות שיש שם זה כמו התופעות בכל אחד מהחברה, אבל ברגע שהחברה מעל 50% חיה בעוני, התופעות יכולות להיות הרבה יותר גדולות. המנהיגים יודעים, לכן גם הם מחפשים פתרון. ברגע שהם מאמינים בארגון כמו שלנו, אז הם באים איתנו. הם הפכו להיות הסוכני שינוי, הם העבירו שאין לנו שום כוונה, אלא לסייע לאנשים להתפרנס בכבוד.
בשלב ראשון התחילו לעבוד בחלק הטריוויאלי, אלו שבאמת צריכים את הפרנסה. אנשים נשואים מעל גיל 30, הוקמו בהתחלה 4 מרכזי הכוון, כשהם הצליחו הממשלה לקחה אותם והגדילה ל-12 מרכזים שפועלים היום בכל רחבי הארץ. הלך טוב עם המבוגרים, בואו נתחיל עם צעירים. אז נפתחה תוכנית חן, שזו תוכנית עם צעירות חרדיות שלומדות בסמינרים, תוך כדי הלימודים, לקחת אותם לתעסוקה איכותית, להשתלב בתעסוקה איכותית, לשמור על הזהות החרדית.
בנינו סוג של פרופסיה חדשה בתוך הסמינרים, שהפך להיות משהו שהיום כל סמינרי יש לו יועצות תעסוקה בתוך כל בית יעקב.
השלב הבא, אחרי שתוכנית חן הצליחה, היה להיכנס אל תוך הישיבות. בחורי ישיבות, תעסוקה, אני יודע שבחורי ישיבות לומדים תורה. איפה בישיבות יש תעסוקה? בא הג'וינט ביחד עם ממשלת ישראל ואמרו, בואו ננסה להיכנס גם למקום הזה של הצעירים, מתוך הבנה שמי שלא באמת עסוק כל היום בתורה, יכול להיכנס לשוק העבודה, ואם ייכנס צעיר, הוא יכול להגיע הרבה יותר רחוק.
קרוב ל-140,000 אנשים עברו בתוכניות שלנו. אני עוד זוכר את הוויכוחים שהיו בהתחלה, מה המספר שאנחנו נושאים כיעד, לא חלמנו להגיע למספרים כאלה.
היום אנחנו עומדים על מצב שבו למעלה מ-50% מהגברים וכקרוב ל-80% מהאנשים משולבים בשוק התעסוקה. הג'וינט נמצא במקום ייחודי, שמצד אחד הוא שותף בכיר של ממשלת ישראל, יודע לדבר את השפה של הממשלה, לעשות תוכניות שהממשלה רוצה, ומצד שני, גם מטעמים היסטוריים, אבל גם מטעמים עכשוויים, אנחנו נמצאים עמוק עמוק בתוך הקהילה החרדית. הג'וינט מעולם לא בא עם גישה פטרונית, עם גישה להגיד לקהילה מה נכון, מה לא נכון, איך כדאי שהיא תתנהג. הוא לא בא עם אג'נדה, הרצון תמיד היה לעזור לקהילה. אין ספק שהדבר הזה הביא את החיבור בין החרדים לבין מדינת ישראל למקומות שלא היו בעבר.
הג'וינט היה שם כדי לעשות את זה. היינו, חיברנו, יזמנו, משהו קרה, משהו השתנה שם.
דווקא אנחנו אלו שמצליחים להזיז את המחט, דווקא אנחנו אלו שעושים דברים שלפני 5 שנים היה אפשר רק לחלום עליהם.
לא נפסיק עד שאנחנו נהיה במצב שאולי היום נראה כאוטופיה, אבל בשביל זה אנחנו פה, כדי לחלום ולהגיע בסופו של דבר, להגשים את החלומות.
Thank you. So what we see from this example, amazing example, is that we're not naive to dream big And we are not thinking that we can do the impossible because we saw it here. It is possible. It is possible to move the needle on major issues in Israeli society. Israel's success in increasing the rate of Haredi men employment shows us that when all the players are working together and are aligned in the targets and efforts, we can create a real measurable impact on a national scale. It requires a perfect storm, but in a positive sense. There needs to be a strong and urgent desire and pressure for change in the Israeli society. There needs to be willingness and readiness in the government. We need to have ministers and professionals who will act as champions for that change. There needs to be willingness to align efforts among leaders across the sectors, municipal leaders, NGOs, business leaders, local community leaders, especially here, and philanthropic leaders. And there needs to be an organization that is able to sit between all of these stakeholders and convene them to get them to sit at the same table and figure out how to work together. And that organization is JDC. When we analyzed the example of how Israel succeeded in raising the rate of Haredi men's employment, we saw that the perfect storm of positive elements was in place. And we analyzed the success and other big successes that we and our partners have achieved. When we broke them down into their basic elements, we saw that our theory of change for tackling major social challenges laid out before our eyes. Let's look at this theory together. Okay, our theory of change explains how we plan to move the needle on our priority social challenges in a way that is measurable so that we can actually verify the impact of our work. So how do we do it? We start with setting impact goals that are quantifiable and therefore measurable. On the issue of Haredi men's employment, this was done in 2010 through a government-led committee process to which JDC was a major contributor. For our social challenge, it's up to us to lead the process with our partners. Regarding the Haredi employment example, we got a clear picture of the situation by comparing Israel's employment rate of working age Haredi men's to Israel employment rate of working age non-Haredi men. In 2009, when these rates were collected, and I'll say something about that, Brookdale has done it even before when TVET, JDC TVET was set up in 2005 and then in 2006. The rate of Haredi men employment in 2009 was 40%. As you saw in the video, it was even less. It was 33% when JDC started to work, compared to the general rate of male employment at that time, which was over 76%. Comparing these numbers enabled the government to get a clear picture of the challenge. Solving the challenge meant closing the gap. In 2010, based on data, the government set a target for Haredi men's employment. The target was to increase the rate of Haredi men's employment to 63% by 2020. Did it happen? No. Was it raised? Yes. Okay. I'd like to note here how radical this all was for the government to quantify, measure, and set a numeric goal for a socioeconomic challenge. And this time it was kind of easier because it had also the economic part in employment. Previously, this is something that we saw the government do only with macroeconomic challenges. Today, we want to see this done with our priority challenges, with all of them. But identifying indicators, setting impact goals for our challenges is more difficult than doing so for workforce integration. Because for workforce integration, we have employment rates. This indicator is well-defined and agreed upon internationally. And it's measurable. And it's continually being measured by the governmental agencies. But how will we measure social mobility or optimal aging or advancing independence for people with disability? Israel doesn't have national indicators to define for these challenges, but we cannot know if our work and others people's work actually is achieving impact without them. So part of our work today is actually to define the indicators by which we want to measure how different demographic groups in Israel are doing on social challenges. Of course, defining these indicators is just the beginning. To achieve the national scale impact, we need these indicators to be agreed upon by all the main ministries and agencies driving social services, which is really, really not a simple task. We also need to define the targets and measurable impact goals that we want to achieve along these indicators. When it came to Haredi men's employment, the government initiated the process of identifying the indicators and the impact goal and getting everyone on board. In the case of social challenges, it is we, the joint, together with our partners, who are trying to identify or develop indicators and impact goals and to actually get all the major national players to adopt them. This is very difficult and it's slow work, but it is something we recently accomplished with our challenge to advance optimal aging. And the meaning that is accomplished for Israel society is huge. Let's take a look.
בשנת 2019 התחיל הג'וינט את התהליך האסטרטגי שלו. המוקד היה לעבור מעבודה סביב תוכניות ליצירת אימפקט. השאלה ששאלנו את עצמנו זה איך נדע להוכיח אימפקט בשדה הזקנה. שאלנו את עצמנו האם יש מדדים להזדקנות מיטבית. חיפשנו וראינו שאין דבר כזה בעולם. ויצאנו לדרך. ב-1 בינואר 2020 הצגנו לפורום שותפים רחב בפעם הראשונה את הטיוטה של מפת המדדים. המפגש הזה היה המפגש שבעצם נתן לנו את האור הירוק להמשיך. שם קיבלנו את המנדט באופן רשמי. עד אותו הרגע זאת הייתה יוזמה שלנו בג'וינט.
מדינת ישראל מבינה שצריך להיערך להזדקנות האוכלוסייה, ורוצים שההזדקנות תהיה הזדקנות מיטבית, והשאלה היא מהי הזדקנות מיטבית?
יש מדדים בתעסוקה, יש מדדים בהייטק, בחדשנות, במקרו, בתוצר לאומי גולמי, אין מדדים בתחומים החברתיים.
וכאן הג'וינט עשה עבודה מאוד מאוד גדולה בנושא של איזה סוג של מדדים הם מדדים שאנחנו יכולים לבחון את עצמנו לאורם, ונבחרו 3 משפחות, משפחה של בריאות ותפקוד, משפחה של משמעות ומשפחה של חוסן כלכלי.
ו3 המשפחות האלה, כל אחת כוללת 2 מדדי על, מדד בריאות ותפקוד במשפחה של הבריאות, מדד בדידות ואיכות חיים במשפחה של המשמעות, ומדד הכנסה פנויה ומוכנות כלכלית בחוסן הכלכלי. אם האתגר הראשון הבסיסי היה להכין את התוכן, את המפה, את ההצעה, אז האתגר הגדול הבא, ואולי הכי חשוב שבלעדיו לא היה קורה שום דבר, זה לייצר את השותפות. עברנו תהליך של תיקוף, הסכמות, רתימה, תיקון, דיוק, מול כל משרד בנפרד, מול הרבה מאוד דרגים מקצועיים, וגם כל פעם חזרנו לאותו פורום ממשלתי רחב והראינו את התוצר.
והממשלה אישרה את מפת המדדים הלאומית, כמפה שמכוונת אותנו למה הזדקנות מיטבית בישראל.
הלמ"ס הולך להוציא בשנה הבאה פרסום ראשון, דוח ראשון של הזדקנות מיטבית.
יש כאן הרבה מאוד גורמים שיכולים להסתכל על מפת המדדים הזאת ולקבל דרכה את כיווני הפעילות הבאים שלהם על מנת לתת את המענים המותאמים יותר והנכונים יותר, שזה יהיה המצפן.
בסוף השנה הבאה אני מקווה שאנחנו נוכל להגיש לממשלה א', המלצות ליעדים, שזה לא רק להגיד מה המדד, אלא איפה רוצים להיות בכל מדד. ודבר שני, שאנחנו נשלים את הפיתוח של כ-80 מדדים מנבאים. מה זה אומר? שלא רק נדע מה המצב היום, אלא מה אנחנו צריכים לעשות היום כדי שהמצב ישתפר מחר. יכול להיות שעוד קשה לנו לדמיין את כל ההשלכות של השינוי הזה. אני אגיד לך למה זה דבר כל כך גדול? כי הילדים שלנו הזדקנו בצורה יותר טובה. בין אם הם ערבים או חרדים, או חיים במרכז או בפריפריה. יש להם כסף, אין להם כסף. המפה הזאת תעזור לנו לחיות יותר טוב ולהזדקן יותר טוב. ואני גאה בזה.
So the adoption of the aging dashboard was a huge, I can't stress enough how huge it is. It was a huge milestone for us and an indication that we are in the right direction. It was also a wonderful example of how we work together with the Myers-Brookdale Institute, who are one of the most important partners in developing the dashboard. We're now hard at work developing similar dashboards for social mobility and for independent living with people with disability. I want at this point, Annie, if it's okay with you, to open for questions.
That would be great. We left a lot of time for questions and discussion because it's an amazing amount of material. Thank you, Sigal. People who have questions can raise their hand in their little square, or they can put it in the chat.
So if I may, this is Sandy. Hi, everybody. It is amazing. And you indicated, Sigal, that other divisions are also working at creating dashboards. Can you tell us, give us some sense of whether this will be a somewhat more rapid process because Eshel has already accomplished this relationship with the government?
So thank you, Sandy, for this question. I think the answer is yes. I don't know if it's more rapid, but it's proven that we can do it. And when we set out, we knew that we needed to set a dashboard for almost all challenges except for employment. We're also, Rani Dudey and his team are doing work on together with Tzvika Eckstein, who set the previous goals. But we knew that we had to set them from the beginning. We just didn't know. I thought it would take at least 3 years. It went really fast because I think of COVID put the elderly in the focus, in the spotlight, and Yossi Hyman and his team really, seized that opportunity and ran with it. And this actually gives us an indication that we can do it because we were really afraid, who is the government giving us the mandate? Can we do it? Are we being too sassy or, to actually take the mandate? And this process that went into a government resolution for better aging today proved that we can. And we're going pretty rapidly in both of those dashboards. I see Lee and Mark, if I'm not mistaken. Lee, you're muted.
Wait, Sigal, there were also 2 questions in the chat.
Sorry.
So I'll just answer.
Maybe just take
quick.
Lee's question because he's
Yeah,
unmuted.
we're at the joint as the staff that actually does the work, the interviewing and the compilations and that sort of activity. Is that Brookdale or what staff of the joint actually does this work?
We have staff at each division, but look, we did it we first started when we went on the way, we did it on a very high level to look at all the challenges and choose them. And we had a lot of data compiled and analyzed then. And we had 2 external advisors, if you remember the strategic process. But then when we went down into each challenge, we have staff, first of all, on the divisions themselves. So you saw Diana, who works under Yossi in planning and analysis and knowledge development and partner convening. And she has staff under her that understands that. And they work with, always we need help with external help. In the case of better aging, it was Brookdale. We worked together with ERI and other research and data organization that actually help us. But we have more and more people within our divisions that understand, that are actually analysts and understand data. They were not expected to do it at the level of the Brookdale researchers, but they need to know the language of the researchers that they work with in order to know what to ask for and how to use it vis-a-vis their mostly governmental partners.
Okay, so I just want to respond to a few questions in the chat and then maybe hand over one, Sigal, either to you or to Yossi. So a few of the questions in the chat, I'm going to combine them from Amy, from Gary, from Claire. They kind of asked about what tools are being used to measure the impact areas? How often will the dashboard be updated? Are we using subjective reporting or objective reporting? So I just want to say that the indicators that were chosen, and I think this is important, one, it's on the national level, and looking at the entire country, and on purpose, indicators were chosen that are being measured not by JDC or any other organization, but by the Central Bureau of Statistics, by national organizations who measure them on a yearly level, on an annual level, on a biannual level. And they're also indicators that are used in other countries so that we can compare where Israel is in comparison to other countries. So there are a number of well-known indicators used in the sphere of the elderly. Yossi could go into them in much greater depth, but in general, when we build these dashboards, we are talking about using indicators that are validated in many different research models. They are used on an annual level, and they are also used by many different countries so that we can do the comparison levels. Some of them are self-reporting. When you're talking about feeling loneliness, it's self-reported. It's not something that you can actually measure objectively, but other ones are quantitative data in terms of salary levels and other issues like that. So it's a mixture of indicators, but they are all indicators that are both found to be valid, have high levels of validity and reliability. And I think one last question that Dick asked is how this is going to influence programmatic decisions. So if you want to take that, Sigal or Yossi, and then we'll hand it over to Mark. Yossi, how is this going to influence programmatic decisions? Yossi?
I heard many questions. I'll try to answer some of them. First of all, main resources.
Yes, sorry, just Galit answered most of them. Just they wanted to know how the information collected, the dashboard actually affects the programmatic decisions.
So we have the data through the Central Bureau of Statistics and survey, international survey like share survey, which is measured in all OECD country. And by the way, all the indicators in our dashboard is compared to the OECD. So Israel measure itself related or measure compared to the OECD. Second, about how we update the indicators. So there are two kinds of indicators. One is the personal indicators, and all the dashboard that were shown, the 6 which are approved by the government, and the other 80 which Diana's talked about, are in a personal level. Now, when we come to the operational level, we lead with the government the large-scale initiatives. And in every large-scale initiative, when we sit with the government to develop those LSI, we are looking for the personal indicator, but in each LSI, we develop dashboard indicators in the system level, which is not in the personal level. And that's how we come to a lesson learned about improving the indicator during the time. That's the way how we do it.
Thank you. I think Mark raised his hand.
Yes, yeah, Sigal. I'll start by saying I don't think you need to prove JDC's effectiveness to anybody on this call. We've all seen it, and I think everybody's on board. But to play devil's advocate a little bit, everybody, the watchword is evaluation, evaluation. That's fine if it comes down to how many meals you're serving, or even issues like employment. But when you're dealing with really serious long-term problems, which we do, whether it's in the area of education, anything, even these areas with dashboards and measurable events. There's so much that goes into it. So I would like to ask, how have we thought about the idea of measuring long-term, like serious long-term, 5-10-year kinds of projects to change a society around using short-term evaluation methods? And have we given much thought to the objectivity of evaluation? I mean, many times I've gotten evaluations on projects that are sales pitches. Look how great we did, as opposed to these are the issues. So that's my, I've got a couple of questions, but that's my main first question.
Okay, I can start, but maybe Galit or Ronnie can add. So, of course, you're asking a researcher who was always wanted to swear by longitudinal studies, because then you follow the same person for 10, 15, 20 years, and you really know what happened to them, and you can actually also look on the variables that happened during the periodically and do regression, and you pretty much know what was your effect specifically on that person. Today, first of all, there is more and more information that can be collected. So it's called big data or whatever, but more and more information that can be collected, and we are working on it. And I have to say, maybe I'll say it later, we changed also the way we think about data. I'll say a few things about that. So first of all, we are thinking seriously about what kind of data we collect, how we can follow things over time, how we can bring in different data sources that actually can help us look for over time over what we need. Specifically for better aging, Diana mentioned it Diana Shimoni mentioned this in the video. Part of the governmental resolution actually put money aside for the Central Bureau of Statistics to collect information and expand the information collected in order to follow the indicators that are in that government resolution. This doesn't go to say to a specific program, but actually what happens in the country over time. So I think these are two things that I can say. Maybe I'll tell you something. At one point of time in JDC, we said, why do we need to collect all this data? Let's do random checks on our clients, see what happened to them, and then understand where we need to go. The ability to do analysis on big data, and then even to use artificial intelligence to think about solutions that we may not have thought with our own minds alone, actually changed our strategy towards data and big data. I think Ronnie Sapir, who's our data and strategy digital strategy director, is here on the call. She can also add to that. But what I want to say is that we're all the time thinking about what we can do in order to actually follow what we do. Specifically about programs, I have to say that we completely moved from only design evaluations that help you design the programs and are usually based on very simple statistics, to checking effectiveness of program, which means that you need to either do randomized control trials or comparison groups or other things that we can do. Hopefully longitudinal studies when you have enough funding and the program actually requires that.
So I want to stop you right now, because actually, and I know, Nancy, you have a question. We see you, but we took a stop after the first part of the theory of change, but we actually haven't showed you the rest of the theory of change. Okay, all we've talked about so far is where we need to go. We haven't yet talked about how we're going to get there. So I think that this is a good opportunity. Mark's question about how we're going to know we got there. is a great question, but I think first we have to say, what are we going to actually do so that we can get there? So I know that Dick, you have a question. I know that Nancy, you have a question. I've written both of them down. I think maybe Sigal, you can continue. We'll finish the theory of change, and then maybe we should go back for another round of questions. Annie, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Galit. Okay, now on to the journey. Thank you, Sigal.
Okay, so actually how we get there, and like Galit said, so setting the impact goals is important, meaningful work that we will deliver major gains in the long run. But it is a critical step in creating the national scale change that we and our partners want to see. So how do we do it? We do it first and foremost for ourselves. We set those impact goals to focus and guide our own efforts towards moving the needle. But ideally, all the major players driving the social services will adopt the same impact goals, because when that happens, you actually got the beginning of what we call a movement for change, where everyone is working towards the same thing and can align their activities accordingly. Just like as what happened with the Haredi men's employment, and as is beginning to happen now with optimal aging. Our goal is to see this happen with all of our challenges. Once we know where we need to go, once we have our impact goals, the next step is to plot the course on how to get there. The way that JDC plans to move the needle on some of Israel's most complex social challenges is through the collection of efforts that we call together, we're calling them large-scale initiatives, LSIs. At the heart of the large-scale initiative is program development. This is actually JDC's classic work, which we do according to our, remember, the DNA model of the program development. We design innovative program, we then pilot them and nurture their development through testing and refining them. And then we accelerate them by handing them over to government, municipalities, nonprofits, business partners, or others, and then they go on and operate and sustain and scale them up. So when we do program development as part of large-scale initiative, we work on a number of programs, each of which plays a role in moving the target population closer towards our impact goal. Program development is necessary, but is not a sufficient condition to achieving our impact goals. We need to drive other efforts as well. We need to work together with the government, with the municipalities, NGOs, business, local community leaders, and others. We need to develop knowledge in the areas of the work and share it with the professionals. We need to support research and collect and analyze data. We need to help shift attitudes. We may even need to influence policy. When it came to moving the needle on Haredi men's employment, we and our partners did many of these types of things, as we saw in the video clip before. We set up the Maftech centers, like Annie said, and trained Haredi staff. We created, you heard Reuven said, we created a profession of Haredi employment counselor and trained relevant people in the Haredi community to do the job. We identified professions that would be suited for Haredi men, developed vocational training programs, and established a diversity hiring forum, Mark, you probably remember that, with UJA, to help employers make their place of work culturally sensitive. We strengthened Haredi NGOs in their capacity to advance employment within the Haredi community. We developed programs to reach Haredi men at younger ages, like you saw in the clip. And we watched and analyzed the data on how Haredi men's employment was changing over the years. All this together with other activities carried out by other partners as well, played an important role in driving Haredi men's employment rates up to about 51% today. To help us do all of this, our board and philanthropic partners are critical. Our success in Haredi employment would not have been possible without a number of major federations and foundations, including the Wolf Foundation, the Weinberg Foundation, the UJA Federation in New York, and many, many others. And this is an example of what we mean by a large-scale initiative. Let's look at the current example in this clip.
שלום לכולם, קוראים לי נופר אלקבץ. אם היית פוגש אותי בשנת 2015, בוא נגיד, היית פוגש נופר שהיא מסוגרת, לא מאמינה בעצמה. יכולתי גם לבחור שהמגבלה תנהל את החיים שלי וכל החיים לשבת במסגרת. אבל בחרתי שלא, בחרתי בעצמאות. לקח לנו שנתיים למצוא את הדירה. בדירה אני גרה 3 שנים. עצמאות זה לא רק דירה, זה גם להשתלב בקהילה, זה גם ללכת לסופר, זה כל דבר שמבחינתך הוא טריוויאלי, מבחינתי זאת העצמאות שלי. פשוט לבוא ולהוכיח שאני בן אדם כמו כל בן אדם אחר.
כשהתחלנו לעסוק בתחום הדיור, התחלנו תוכנית אחת שנקראת דיור נתמך. תוכנית שהמטרה שלה היא לסייע לאנשים לצאת ממסגרות דיור או מבית ההורים ולחיות באופן עצמאי בקהילה. ראינו את הסרטון של נופר, נופר היא דוגמה נהדרת למי שבאמת נלחמה על הזכות שלה לחיות באופן עצמאי, והתוכנית סייעה לה במימוש העצמי הזה. התוכנית עושה שינוי, היא עשתה מהפך. היא אפשרה ועדיין מאפשרת לאנשים עם מוגבלות לחיות בקהילה. כשמסתכלים 10 שנים אחורה, זה לא היה המצב. אבל אנחנו גם מבינים שבשביל לעשות שינוי משמעותי, תוכנית אחת היא לא מספיקה. אנחנו עברנו לתפיסה בכלל של מהלך. אנחנו מדברים על מהלך הדיור. תוכניות הם כלי אחד בתוך מהלך הדיור שאנחנו פועלים בו. אבל בתוך המהלך אנחנו פועלים גם בערוצים של עיצוב מדיניות. אנחנו פועלים בערוצים של בחינה כלכלית והבאת מודלים כלכליים שיאפשרו שינוי משמעותי. אנחנו מסתכלים על טכנולוגיה, איך טכנולוגיה יכולה לאפשר יותר עצמאות לאנשים עם מוגבלות. אנחנו מסתכלים על שינוי עמדות, יש עוד דרך ארוכה בשינוי עמדות לעשות, גם של אנשי המקצוע, גם של המשפחות, הרבה פעמים גם של האנשים עצמם, של הארגונים המפעילים. כל המרכיבים האלה ביחד למעשה יוכלו להוביל אותנו לשינוי משמעותי במחט, לשינוי משמעותי בתפיסה ובאפשרויות שיש לאנשים עם מוגבלות לגור בקהילה. מהלך הדיור למעשה כולל 4 רגליים עיקריות. הרגל הראשונה היא רגל שעוסקת בדיור עצמו. אדם לא יכול להתגורר באופן עצמאי בקהילה אם אין לו היכן להתגורר. בשנים האחרונות אנחנו מתחילים להפעיל את מיזם הדירות, שלמעשה עוסק ברכישת דירות, על מנת שלאנשים עם מוגבלות תהיה פתרון יציב וארוך טווח למגורים עצמם. הרגל השנייה היא הרגל של שירותים תומכי דיור. שירותים כמו דיור נתמך או דיור נתמך מעובה או דירות אימון, שנותנים תמיכה לאדם להתגורר באופן עצמאי בקהילה, וגם עושים איתו הכנה למגורים עצמאיים. הרגל השלישית, הרחבת הזכאויות, הזכויות שהמדינה יכולה לתת, כדי שהאדם יהיה לו האפשרות הכלכלית לחיות באופן עצמאי בקהילה. והרגל הרביעית היא הרגל של עבודה עם הקהילה עצמה. אדם לא צריך להתגורר ב4 קירות באופן בודד, אלא שהוא צריך להשתייך לקהילה רחבה, להיות חלק ממשהו גדול יותר, כדי לקבל משמעות וערך לחיים העצמאיים שלו. לאנשים עם מוגבלות לפני 10 שנים לא הייתה אפשרות אחרת. לא הייתה להם אופציה. אנחנו יצרנו כאן מציאות חדשה, שאדם יכול לבוא ולהגיד להוריו, למשפחתו, לקהילה שלו, אני רוצה להיות חלק מהקהילה. אני רוצה לגור באופן עצמאי בקהילה. מישהו פעם אמר לי, לא האמנתי שלי יהיה סלון משלי, שולחן סלון משלי. ובשבילי זה התמצית של המהלך הזה, שהאדם מרגיש שיש משהו שהוא שלו.
So before we open up for questions, I would like to just say that our work to advance independent living with people with disability on a massive scale and in a systematic way is an incredible example of what we're accomplishing today with your help. The philanthropic partners are an essential player in the movement for change that we're developing to advance our large-scale initiatives. For this initiative, major supporters like the Israeli Foundation, the Ruderman family for many years, and our JDC board member, Merav Mendelbaum, have been utterly essential for the change that we're seeing. And this is the same for all of our major initiatives. And maybe I can tell you a little secret here, that vis-a-vis the government, we sometimes use you in order to advance what we want to do. And this actually works. So I think Annie, we're opening for another round of questions, right? Before your summary? Okay.
Yep, that would be great. We put enough time aside. So Galit, sometimes it's kind of hard to read them in the chat. Did you make a list?
So maybe first, I know that Nancy had a question.
Right.
Nancy Hackerman, and Dick Spiegel, if we didn't answer your question, if you want to ask. And then there's also Mark Duval, who asked another good question in the chat. Maybe he'll want to say it out loud after Nancy.
Great.
Thanks. Am I unmuted? Yeah.
No, you're good.
I just wanted to say that a lot of this information which is wonderful, is very high up here in terms of foundations and people with, $1 zillion and stuff like that. But you can also make an enormous imprint at Myers JDC Brookdale. I cannot tell you how many things I thought, oh, let's talk about Haredi employment. Let's talk about the elderly. Let's talk about the difference care makes for the elderly or visitors, or just a million little studies and a million little surveys that anybody can underwrite, that starts the whole thing going, or at least, works with all the big guys. So I recommend for anyone who wants to get their hands dirty or wants to really feel like they're making a major impact in a smaller way, to just get involved with their research, and then JDC can do everything else.
Thank you, Nancy. That's a brilliant observation. Thank you. Galit?
Okay, Dick, do you want to ask? You're on mute.
We've talked a lot about establishing long-term goals. I'd like to, my question really, I didn't explain very well in the chat typing because my typing is not very good. But what I really like to know is, how are we going to use short-term feedback to fulfill our goals? Because short-term feedback, in my experience with JDC, because we did this in PACT, as I saw Michael Novak on it earlier, evaluations would come in every 6 months, sometimes more often, and programmatics were changed because of that information that came through. Is that part of the loop in what you're talking about now?
Sigal, you want to respond?
I'm not sure I understand, so Galit, maybe.
So I will answer. So I think that, first of all, we're talking about ongoing measurement. I think that today we have more tools in terms of collecting data and using that so that we can even, it's not even short-term evaluation. We're talking about ongoing measurement so that we can fine-tune and fix ourselves, very, very quickly. And then in addition to that, it's taking these long-term goals and breaking them down into much smaller milestones. So you have your national impact goals, which are 10 years down the line. And then you say, okay, we're going to try and impact predictive indicators on a national scale and do that within 5 years. In order to do that, we need 3 different programs. I mean, even if we take the independent housing example, we have 3 different programs, 5 different programs. Now we're going to set up measures for each one of those 5 different programs, and we're going to measure them on milestones of first quarter, second quarter, first year, second year, and then we're going to do evaluations on a much smaller basis. So everything is eventually broken down. Your measurement is, in the end, we're doing measurement on all levels. We're going to be doing measurement on individual programs the same way we always did, but we're also going to be measuring things on an aggregate level. How do the different programs work together in order to move the needle on a national scale on an aggregate level? So we're actually adding additional levels of measurement. Does that answer your question?
Yes, you did very well, and I very much appreciate it. And I must tell you, I feel much better knowing that the micro will drive the macro. Yes. I think that's exactly what's happening here, and that's terrific. It works.
So I think Mark had a question, and then I saw some other hands.
Just before, I do want to say to Nancy's remark that I do think that as we always used research and Brookdale's research, and I think it's becoming even more crucial to everything we do. But Nancy, it's also maybe to say thank you for supporting also the big stuff in JDC as Haredi employment, because the things that people are not aware, but the board members, both your gifts that are given, you know, to the core of what we do and then to our programs are really, really what makes us able to think out of the box, to take time to do the research, to contract with research agencies and Brookdale, and to do the things that we really, you know, to move things forward, and then to actually deliver on the ground and measure bottoms up. So thank you for that too.
Oh, you're welcome, but anybody can do that, really, anybody that's watching.
True. Thank you, Nancy. Mark had a question?
Yeah, thanks. My typing skills are also lousy, but I put it into the chat. But my question has to do with resource utilization. And to my knowledge, the government of Israel is often unwilling to pick up certain overhead charges, and certain foundations don't do that either. Where does research evaluation, particularly as we are going to be spending more and more money on these major projects, how will that be handled in terms of government of Israel funding, other foundation funding, in terms of paying their fair share of evaluation costs, or will we need to dip into unrestricted dollars?
So I think, thank you, Mark, for that question. It's excellent because we had to wrap our head around that question as well when we dove into this, and delve into it because we knew that we're gonna need costs. And we kind of, I remember the first time it was in Eshel that we brought, you know, the concept of research and setting the goals, and actually put you know, a tab attached to it, and we didn't know if we will be able to pass that in that meeting, in that board, and it passed. And so our goal is to bring as much of that spending into the approval of the government contract, in our partnership contract, and we're doing that. We're actually bringing it to the table and approving it as part of what we do, and looking at it as large-scale initiatives that include programs but also include the other parts is actually what helps us do it. And I want to say that we're trying to do the same thing vis-a-vis our ask from foundation. So I can't say yet, but we just, Efrat knows, we just received very, very good news from a big foundation partner of us that they actually approved a fund that we asked not for a specific program, but for a large scale initiative that includes everything inside it. Also convening the partners. How do we put, you know, Elka knows how to do it, but it's usually not included in the price tag in the different challenges or divisions. We're putting that in that as well. So we are learning how to do it, and our governmental partners, I mean, surprisingly, they're not, they understand the value. You see our partners in Eshel, for example, in the last meeting, both the health ministry and also the Ministry of Welfare and the Ministry of Equal Opportunities.
Social equality.
Social equality said that they're taking the measurement for better aging as that's the part of their plan for 2022. That's what their ministers actually asked to look, how their plans look into those, drive into those goals. So they understand why we need measurement in order to do that.
That's great news. And I think it's important that these people realize, and this is to Dick's point before about micro informing macro, evaluation is just an extension of product or program development. So it's not we do the development, we evaluate it. We do the development, we evaluate, we change, we evaluate.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Sandy Dantel, Sandy, you had a question in the chat. Maybe you want to say it out loud. Okay, so I will read it. Sandy asked about how frequently will the JDC Israel divisions compare dashboards to make sure that this overriding strategy is not lost.
Galit.
No, so I think that I'll say two things about that. First of all, one of the things that we're looking into building, and that's another thing that Ronnie, who is working with us on data and digital, is doing quite a lot, is really building a whole catalog of indices. Okay, so that we have something, a big catalog that we build together across the organization, so that if you know, Ashalim is developing great indices on social mobility, then that can also be used for parts of workforce integration or parts of other divisions. And everybody is looking to develop indicators on how we're changing the system, so we can all develop that and use that together. So that's definitely something that we're going to be looking at sharing knowledge and doing together. And the other thing I have to say is that the overall strategy is something that we need to reevaluate constantly. The world is changing very, very quickly. Our long-term strategy is not changed, our challenges have not changed, but the number of times that we have to re-examine and align ourselves with what's happening in the environment, and we saw that in COVID, and we saw that with all the crises that Israel went through this past year, it's something that we have to constantly monitor the environment and make the necessary changes. And we have to do that as an entire organization. Sigal, you want to add?
No, I think that's good. I see another question about the possibility of selling programs. Is there another one?
That's what we have right now.
Okay, so yes, there is a
every possibility is open.
No, and actually it's not only that there are possibilities, we actually started looking into it and trialing ourselves in selling programs. Eshel has already sold. It's not selling the program so much, but it's selling the training to other NGOs. It's kind of business to business work in other countries. So it was work vis-a-vis a big NGO in FSU, looking into things that we can do in Czechoslovakia, maybe. We're testing, you'll see, you can compliment me on others, but we are testing abilities in that realm. It's not that easy. It's not that profitable, but I think over and above bringing money in, it also makes us better in what we do. We need to package, we need to explain, we need to actually put a price tag that's very, very exact, and it makes us much better in what we do. And it's also a very good positioning vis-a-vis other international organizations that deal with the same challenges. So we're looking into it, we're testing ourselves how good we can do it. We learned a lot. Tali Amir, who might be on the call, actually took it as part of her job in JDC Israel and was, learning all kinds of models that are happening in Israel. And we're trying ourselves. We're really doing it and looking into what it brings to JDC.
Investment in the future, we'll say.
Investment in the
future. Are there any
future.
other questions that you see in the chat, or anybody else want to ask a question?
I think Lee wants to ask another question.
Okay, good. Go ahead, Lee.
Okay. My question is this, is I've heard a lot this morning about how you evaluate and test and measure the various programs as they go along, and that's obviously commendable. But my original question was, given the fact that Israel has a lot of challenges and crises of one thing or another, and JDC can't solve them all, when the various problems and crises are presented to you, what I want to know was, how do you decide at that point whether you're going to invest a lot of money in trying to find a solution to problem A rather than try to find a solution to problem B? And I mean, that's like the initial question. And with, the dollars are so precious, especially, undesignated dollars, how do you decide, whether you're going to make that investment? and as I say, in trying to find a solution to A rather than B?
So that's, that's the $1 or $100 million question, because
Yes, it is.
It is. And when we set out to do the strategic process 3.5 years ago, that's exactly what we asked ourselves. And what we did is we actually looked from different kind of lenses and what are going to be the major challenges for the country of Israel that really are the ticking time bombs, and that JDC has an advantage, an extra value proposition in helping them. And we mapped out 33 of those, and we finally chose 5. It's not exactly, because we categorize some in the same category, but we chose 5, and the 5 were those that better aging, social mobility, productivity in the labor market, and some integration after COVID as well. We went back to that as well. Autonomy and independence for people with disability, and everything we do in ELCA, which is actually effectiveness and efficiency of the systems. And in those, and problems keep coming up. I'll give you just one example. The whole issue of violence and crime in the Arab society was one of the 33 challenges, which we decided to put aside at that time. Another challenge that we put aside at that time were car accidents and what happened from it. It's not the hurt, the damage is not divided equally among populations. The weaker populations are hurt more. So we had all kinds of challenges that we put aside then and now come back to our table for all kinds of reasons, from urgent reasons, what happened recently in Israel, but also now everyone is talking in the past 2 weeks. I don't know if you heard about the transportation in Israel and how many car accidents there are. So things keep coming up. And one of the things we do is we do censorship of, not censorship, censoring of everything new that keeps coming up, or old problems that keep coming up. And we ask ourselves questions. So only a week and a half ago, we went, the whole management team, to Tamra. We met there in the police station, and then with the mayor, and we went to the schools, and we heard all about the feeling of security, the personal feeling of security, how they deal with crime, what needs to be done. And now what we're doing is we're thinking, okay, how do we take our programs that deal with mobility or in employment or in other parts, and we add that kind of stream of thought of what we need to do in order to also think about personal security. But we're also asking ourselves a question: do we need to go back and recheck our challenges, and do we need to add something? Yes, no, okay. And for each of those, we take hard decisions. And now that there's going to be a contract signed very, very soon for everything we do in partnership with the government. Part of the steering committee job is to actually look at these questions and consult with our Israel executive and the advisory committees, bring it to the table, come back with what we need to do. I'll give another example. For example, in the area of employment, we decided to focus on productivity because we said we did a lot in integration. We're going to focus on productivity. The productivity of workers in Israel is really, really bad comparison to other parts of the world. COVID came. The people who were thrown out of the labor market or went out of the labor market were the weakest, lowest educational levels. We went back to the table and we did put some of our dollars or efforts back also into the integration of those communities. So it's an ongoing question. We're developing new methods of censoring the new problems that come up, and we're reevaluating all the time.
Okay, thanks.
Can I follow up? Can I follow up on the question that I asked in the chat?
I don't see that. Sure.
That's definitely Richard. Richard, yeah, go ahead.
So the question I asked, for those who didn't see it, is whether, particularly after the Abraham Accords, we are collaborating and sharing information with NGOs in the Arab world, in the Gulf states in particular. And I'm curious, the answer was yes, But could you talk a little more about?
I didn't understand. I thought you were talking about Arab NGOs in Israel. I apologize.
No. I'm talking about NGOs in Arab countries outside Israel. Is there an opportunity to do that? Is that something the government is, now seizing upon as an opportunity to as part of its developing relationship with the Gulf states and so on? So that was really my question.
Okay, so the answer is actually, it's pretty much no, okay? We had in the past a few relationships with the Arab NGOs around employment. It was actually one from Jordan, and it was pretty random, and one from the Palestinian Authority. It's a question that did come up to our table, okay? We just haven't dealt with it yet, and thank you for bringing this up. Riva, this is something that we need to look into much deeper. We did started to look into possible funding that could come from organizations or governments following the Abraham contracts that could be interesting, but cooperation with NGOs is really interesting, and we thank you for bringing it up.
I think it's a real opportunity.
I agree.
So a similar question actually came up from Karen Moss, who asked about whether any of our programs have, if we work together with GRID, whether, I'll say it exactly, what is the relationship between our programs and those of GRID? If applicable, how does our work inform or guide the work of GRID?
So maybe I'll say just something more general, that we are working with the different parts of JDC. With FSU, Eshel had a lot of exchange of knowledge. It's not only one way, it's both direction, exchange of knowledge. We had that with Europe as well. With GRID, I must say we had a little less from what I know, but just because of the natural way to go about it. But we are looking into a cooperation across JDC area. Maybe you can say some things about it, but around technological solutions that can actually serve different populations across countries, and a lot of them may come from the startup nation in Israel, but from others as well. So generally, we're exchanging information, and we want to do it even more. Ariel, you want to comment about that?
Sure. Speaking broadly, that's something that I think we can expect to see more of in the coming years, as we have organized the executive team to encourage this kind of integration and collaboration. And I will also say that our leaders in all of these areas are very much oriented towards that as well. The other thing I would say about GRID is that although, as you say, Sigal, the specific integration or collaboration, may not be as much as with other areas, GRID also is very interested in helping to. It's not their central mission, but where where a GRID project checks all the boxes, it involves working with a local Jewish community to meet humanitarian needs, and often using Israeli technology. So it's actually a complementary goal that Israeli startup companies, many of whom are also involved in what we're going to see in the tech issues, in joint tech, and in tech through, as you said, Sigal, throughout the joint, that's kind of a component of that as well.
Yeah, and thank you. And in the past also, I remember there was, I don't know those who remember Chibuki, this doll that was actually invented by Ashalim for treating trauma in the south of Israel, was actually used by GRID all around disaster areas. So there are some cooperation, and I think with time, like Ariel said, we want to actually strengthen that. We think a lot of good things happen in different regions, and we need to do even more collaborations than there is today, but we all want to do it. We all see it as valuable.
Okay, now we're going to wrap up this session because it may run over for a couple minutes. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, Sigal. And thank you, Galit, for always navigating us through this. You're terrific. This has been a fascinating session, and we covered a lot of information. I'm sure you all feel like it's warp speed marathon of the incredible work of JDC Israel. I'd like to quickly summarize what we learned. We started by saying that JDC's goal in Israel is to move the needle, to create measurable impact on our priority social challenges. And we saw that this looks like, and we saw what this looks like with the example of Haredi men's employment. Then we looked at the starting point of creating measurable impact, which is setting impact goals. And we saw how we are working on this with our partners for our optimal aging challenge. Then our impact goals, large-scale initiatives. And we saw this illustrated for our challenge of advancing independent living for people with disabilities with our work in the area of housing. So, how is this different from what we were doing before? Yes, the Joint has always done more than program development, but weaving our program development and other activities together to achieve fewer but larger goals and working harder to convene partners around achieving these goals is new. We are placing much more emphasis on building and driving a movement for change with our partners around each of our challenges. And we are stepping up in terms of being accountable by creating a rigorous method for measuring the extent to which our work achieves national impact. To help us go deeper in these areas of work, utilizing data and developing digital capabilities has to become a much bigger part of our efforts. And this will be the topic of our upcoming forum. Until then, I'd like to say a huge thank you to you, because without you, none of this is possible. Our supporters have been there every step of the way, and we appreciate it greatly. JDC is unique in its ability to do the work we do because of you. No organization in Israel is able to invest so much time and effort into the types of work we described here. But these types of work are essential to achieve measurable impact on a national scale. It cannot be done without everything we described here today and without you. Your help is what enables us to do it, and we are so deeply proud and honored to be doing it on your behalf. And we aim to make you proud of everything we do by succeeding in our efforts. I'd like to thank JDC Israel's leadership and staff for working tirelessly to create real social change in a country we care so much about. Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again at our next forum in January. Until then, I hope everyone stays healthy and safe. And I'd like to give a special shout out to a special invitee who joined us today, Alyssa Levin from UJA New York. Alyssa chairs the International Planning and Allocations Committee and is very, very important to the work we do. Aside from all other visitors and guests we have on the call. And thank you for everything you do for JDC Israel. Without you, we could not do business as we do. So thank you so much. And thanks for the team at JDC Israel. You guys are amazing. So until next time, thank you, and we appreciate you. Take care.